Hey, what's up, guys, and welcome back into Win or Lose Chiefs News. I am hoping to make today's podcast video episode a short one, but knowing me and my tendency to talk a lot, we'll see if that actually holds true. The NFL draft was last weekend, Thursday to Saturday, and so I wanted to get on here and just do a very brief recap, nothing too in-depth. Nothing too heavy on stats or all of the nitty-gritty pre- and mock draft analysis. I'm focused a little bit more on the post-draft analysis, but again, nothing in the weeds, more high-level thoughts and just my initial reactions. Just kind of some recap, post-draft thoughts of, I think, where we go from here with the rookie mini camps, and then looking ahead to some of the off-season OTAs before we get into training camp. And again, before I start, my name is Alex Liu. Welcome to the channel. If you're new, this is Win or Lose Chiefs News. I kind of do a mix of Chiefs news and updates, but also podcasting. And during the season, it's a lot more recapping each game each week. And I pair this with my blog, which is Win or Lose Chiefs News Blog Edition, and that's on my WordPress. And I will leave a link in the description down below, so please be sure and check that out. Everything that I'm going to talk about here today is pretty much based on what I blogged about. So I want to start off by just kind of prefacing, before the draft, much of this offseason, a lot of mock draft talk for the Chiefs was kind of really bouncing around all these ideas of, okay, what's the priority? What are the main positional needs? And I think early on, it was definitely edge rusher. We definitely needed to bolster the pass rush because the Chiefs had a lot of issues last season and probably for a couple of years now with getting to the quarterback, and in particular only rushing four. That's become increasingly popular in the NFL, is dropping more guys in coverage and letting the front four really dictate the tempo of the game, which is, a big thing that we saw in the last time the Chiefs played in a Super Bowl. They got manhandled up front. Their offensive line could not protect against even just a four-man rush. The Eagles defense that Super Bowl did not blitz, I don't think, once all game, or if they did blitz, it was very rare. They didn't really need to. So that's become, I would say, a big need in today's NFL is defensively, you want to be able to rush with just four and get pressure and be disruptive. So that way you can sit a lot more of your secondary and your linebacking core in coverage to really outnumber, I think, however many receiving threats, both from the line of scrimmage and out of the backfield that an offense is running. It started off being, the Chiefs need a pass rusher. But once we also got into a little bit more of the Chiefs had very little ground game in 2025, and Pacheco went to the Lions, and he also was not the same ever since he suffered some injuries. Kareem Hunt is getting older for running back standards, even though I don't even think the guy's 30 years old yet, but he's also a guy that has a lot of wear and tear on him. I'm not necessarily talking about like his legs, but just he takes a lot of hits. He's gotten really banged up. Right now, he's not even listed on the Chiefs roster, and I don't know if that's because he's a free agent and it's TBD whether we're actually going to bring him back or not. We needed to go in a different direction. So running back was definitely a big need, but I'm going to get to that a little bit more later on because obviously we made a huge splash signing, if you will, in Kenneth Walker III, a.k.a. K9. Running back, edge rusher, those were some big needs, definitely, but then things really changed during free agency when we also let go via trade to the Rams, not just Trent McDuffie, but also Jalen Watson. So you let your two top corners go, and much of the 2022 draft class for the Chiefs is pretty much now gone. I think Karlaftis might be the only guy remaining from that draft. Cornerback, probably the past month or so, definitely became like a huge glaring spot to definitely reload on. And then also wide receiver was in the mix. The Chiefs offensively have had their struggles, but I think a big-bodied receiver is something that they've been criticized for. They have speed, even though they're still struggling to consistently connect on deep ball threats. But wide receiver, I think they also needed to address that as well, and especially since Travis Kelce, who, although a tight end, has been one of the more obvious receiving threats for the Chiefs up until recent years, where he's definitely slowing down. He's older at this point. He's coming back, but it remains to be seen whether he's just going to come back for this final year in 2026, even though he signed a 3-year extension, I think it is, 2 or 3 year extension. A lot of contingencies there. And then I think a lot of Chiefs fans would have said, oh, well, we definitely need more offensive line help as well. After injuries, depth is definitely a concern, and I would say it's also a concern at least one of the tackle spots. I think Josh Simmons has that left tackle spot pretty much secure, but it remains to be seen whether we're going to go Jalen Moore or maybe Esapole on the right tackle spot. Out of those position groups, and then also tight end was also a draft need, according to ESPN and probably some other outlets as well, just because we are probably thinking about a successor for Travis Kelce going forward. Right now, we still have Noah Gray and we have Jared Wiley. Jared Wiley's struggled with some injuries and staying healthy. Noah Gray, love the guy, but he's most likely not going to be the long-term solution at tight end, someone that you are hoping can be your next franchise tight end, so to speak. Anyway, like I said, after we signed Kenneth Walker, running back no longer really the priority because there was a lot of talk heading into the draft. Are we going to try and go and take Jeremiah Love? Is Jeremiah Love even going to be available at pick number 9, right? So, and then I talked about this in my blog, but I think even after getting Kenneth Walker III, offensive line was not as much of a focus leading up to the draft, just because the more you really look at the Chiefs' offensive line, it's really not as much of an issue as people think. Yes, there was concern about Patrick Mahomes' protection, security, safety, but if you don't have a running game, which the Chiefs did not have last year, I mean, this is a running back room and a ground attack that wasn't able to manage more than like 2 to 3 yards a carry. No explosive runs, so when you look at it through that lens, I think what I'm trying to say is O-line, aside from the injuries last year, offensive line had a lot of pressure on them because defenses pretty much knew the Chiefs can't run on them. So they're going to force them into these long passing downs and second and third downs. Plus, they had way too many penalties from the offensive line on passing downs. So that's that. So defensive line really was a big focus. And I think most Chiefs fans were really looking at Reuben Bain Jr., David Bailey. It was to be expected that he wasn't, going to slide anywhere close to number 9. So Reuben Bain Jr., some others, I think Zion Young, I think was one, a name that was thrown out there. But either way, the Chiefs needed to address a pass rusher who could rush on the opposite side from Karlaftis. I liked the name Reuben Bain Jr. I know there was a lot of criticism about his short arms. Again, on this channel, I don't want to make it seem like I have any problems or anything against draft nerds. More power to you. All the props in the world to people who nerd and geek out over all the pre-draft analysis, all the speculation coming out of the combine, all of the metrics and stats. That's just not me, because if I were to put mentally all my eggs in one basket on a pick or two that I would see the Chiefs getting and they don't get that person, then it's like, okay, did I even research this person over here? It's a lot of names, a lot of faces, a lot of guys who, because of the transfer portal, they do not play 3 to 4 years at a certain school anymore. They are bouncing around from 2, sometimes even 3 schools in their college career over the span of sometimes even 5 or 6 years of eligibility, depending on redshirting. What I want to start off before we get to the very first pick in the first round is I had a feeling that Brett Veach, in his infamous fashion, I will say, in recent years, I had a feeling that he was probably going to make a move. But I thought that if anything, we were going to trade up from the 29th pick, so our second first-round pick. Instead, we swapped picks with the Cleveland Browns. We were at number 9, they were at number 6. We swapped, and then we also sent them our 3rd round and one of our 5th round picks of this year. So a lot of people were criticizing, saying, oh, wow, the Chiefs just traded up a lot. Who are they going to get? And I think most people anticipated they're going to go get an edge rusher. Well, they did not. They went and got Mansour Delane, cornerback from LSU. And I'm just going to also preface, before I get into the rest of these picks, I don't think I've heard of really hardly any of these guys that the Chiefs drafted. I only was familiar with a lot of the names that were mocked to the Chiefs or that were rumored as potential fits or landing spots for the Chiefs. So outside of like David Bailey, Reuben Bain Jr., Jeremiah Love, wide receiver Jordan Tyson from Arizona State, I believe. There weren't a lot of guys that I really had much knowledge of. And apparently this was also kept quiet. It was said later on after the fact, after the pick, that the Chiefs actually purposefully meant to keep this quiet. I think there was talk about whether they wanted to fly Mansour Delane out to Kansas City, do an interview in person, but they opted for a Zoom interview. And that's because Steve Spagnuolo wanted to keep this quiet and said, nope, let's not be loud about it. Let's not, because, these NFL reporters, they're all over everything. There's all these insider sources. So they kept it quiet. But a lot of people think that the Chiefs reached for this pick. Some people, I was reading in comments on Instagram and reading some post-game reaction articles on ESPN, a lot of people felt like Delane would have been there still at 9, and they didn't need to trade all that draft capital up to get him. But on the flip side, some people were saying, no, actually, the New Orleans Saints, and I think even the Washington Commanders, who drafted right before, were supposed to draft before the Chiefs at 9, that Mansour Delane was someone on their radars. I trust it. I trust Veach being aggressive and kind of being a little all-in a way, swapping 3 picks to go and get 1. Other than, I think, one person's mock draft that I saw on ESPN and just overall ratings for players by position, Mansour Delane is pretty much unanimously the top cornerback in his class. So going to get a guy like this, clearly the intention was, you lost McDuffie and Jalen Watson, we're going to go get a top corner who's basically going to be a day 1, week 1 starter, and heading into training camp, he's going to have that number 1 job. On the other side, it's now going to be, are we going to have a battle between guys like Noel Williams, who's entering his 2nd year, maybe Christian Fulton if he can stay healthy. And we'll get to this later. The Chiefs started defense this year, and they continued that trend in a much more profound way than they have in the past. Mansour Delane, overall, I'm pretty happy with it. They kind of repeated a similar strategy and approach that they did in 2022 when they went and got McDuffie with their first round pick, or first pick in the first round. And one thing that I mentioned in my blog as well is you're not only replacing what you lost this past year in McDuffie and Jalen Watson, but you're also replacing a presence that we've actually kind of been missing since even 2024, and that's when we traded L'Jarius Sneed away. So over the last couple of years, our cornerback security has really we've lost it all. So we're starting out fresh. We're starting out young. Rookie contracts. You get that number 1 corner, top corner replacement in Mansour Delane. Like I said earlier, I'm not going to go through all of the tangibles and intangibles of what people are saying about Delane. Some of the positives I have heard is that he's very good at getting his head around and tracking the ball when initially he doesn't know where the ball is. So that's a huge plus. I think I've heard that he's not really as handsy as a lot of other cornerbacks are, and that's something that the Chiefs have definitely struggled with, I would say, in coverage, is getting a little too handsy, too grabby, pass interference, defensive holding calls. So hopefully that holds true, translating from college to the NFL. But, any of the negatives, any of the downsides, downsides to Delane in his game, I like to wait and see until training camp and preseason games and early on in the season. A lot of those things, they're just kind of scrutiny and criticism, and it doesn't mean things can't get changed or things can't be coached and developed out of a player, translating from what they learned and what they are used to and what they were doing in college to the pros. So remains to be seen. Another plus that I mentioned is the Chiefs consistently have shown and proven that they can develop cornerbacks and really just their secondary in general. They have very good coaching there. Something else I'm going to touch on, unrelated to football, but in the DB room later on. But that is a plus to know that, hey, not only did you get a number 1 corner, but you also are really good at developing those corners. So if they could develop guys who were picked in later rounds in the past, like Jalen Watson, Joshua Williams, I think that's a huge positive and a bright spot for the future of Mansour Delane. Is if he's already a very top-tiered cornerback, what's his ceiling? How much more can he improve, and what's his real potential with the Chiefs? I think initially, overall, with the first pick for the Chiefs in the draft I was shocked initially by the trade up. and how and what all we gave up for it. And then I was shocked that we actually went cornerback. But the more I thought about it, I was like, well, since that trade with the Rams, we needed a top tier corner. I would say the secondary was almost nearly depleted of major veteran players that we've had over the past few years. So D-line is in a little bit better shape heading into the draft than the secondary was. So I was okay with it. Moving on to the second first-round pick, and this was also in a trade from the Rams, we got Peter Woods, defensive tackle from Clemson. And I called my sister over the weekend because she went to Clemson. She hasn't really paid much attention to Clemson football since she left, but I've never heard of this guy. She's never heard of this guy. I also was surprised by this pick. I like the pick. I'm just going to say that right now, but I was surprised. I thought, okay, we took a corner with the first pick. Maybe we're going edge rusher with the second pick. The more I thought about this pick, after my initial thoughts and reactions, Chris Jones, I think he turns 32 years old in July. So even though we went out and got a veteran D-tackle in Kairos Tonga from the Patriots in free agency, we're clearly continuing to try to bolster depth. So now you have two young backup D-tackles who are most likely going to rotate in. Omar Norman-Lott hopefully should be coming back from his torn ACL last season. And then Peter Woods will be that fourth D-tackle because I don't believe the Chiefs have Derek Nnadi anymore. And I don't think they have Mike Pennell either. So they're trying to get a little bit more youth and maybe grooming some eventual successors to Chris Jones one day because he is starting to get up there. I can probably only see Chris Jones playing a few or a handful more years after this season, especially at a high level. That's what makes sense to me with the pick in Peter Woods. I think when you look elsewhere along the defensive line, one thought that I had was, surely they're going to take a edge rusher at some point in this draft. But I also thought, well, one possibility is we've seen Chris Jones actually line up outside on occasion. I think he did that a fair amount, maybe 2 years ago. And he surely did it a little bit last season. I don't have all the numbers on that, but there have been times we've seen Chris Jones even just pick out his one-on-one matchup and actually basically defensive audible or the equivalent of that at the line of scrimmage. And he'll trade places with one of his fellow D linemen and he'll line up outside or he'll switch around in the interior. So, I mean, as much as you want a pass rusher, and a pass rush can certainly come from the outside of the D line, you also are going to need not just run stopping support, but also pass rush ability from the interior of that D-line as well. So I like the Peter Woods pick. Huge kid. Definitely, I think he has a lot of potential. And Tonga, Peter Woods, Omar Norman-Lott, they can just only continue to learn more from Chris Jones. It's just something else I thought of. So I think it's a good pick. On the exterior of that D-line, George Karlaftis is still solidified as one of our true edge rushers. So I think we've bolstered the interior. We're going to get to later on what the Chiefs did in another pick later on in the draft. But overall, Peter Woods, I like the pick. I think there was quite a bit of criticism and skepticism and also people questioning, did the Chiefs make the right moves? Because I think people were so sold on this idea that, hey, they got to go edge rusher in the first round. I try to stay positive and embrace and welcome the new players we get and be supportive of those picks, not just for Veach, Andy Reid, and the whole Chiefs front office and coaching staff with their scouting and draft decision-making, but also because I just don't like hearing about fans and then even non-Chiefs fans criticize and say, oh, you wasted a pick there, you reached, you don't need this position right now, that could have come later on. I welcome Mansour Delane and Peter Woods and really all the picks that the Chiefs made. And that's just me and my fan bias and preferences. I'm trying to be positive, supportive, and welcoming to not only Kansas City, but Chiefs Kingdom of these guys. And let's see what they can do before we start criticizing, saying, oh, we messed up that pick. I would say there's only really a handful of Chiefs players over the last few years, few drafts where I was like, they didn't really work out. So let's try to be positive before we, jump to conclusions and assumptions of what these guys can and can't do. Moving on to day 2, we only had one pick on last Friday, and that was, drumroll please, we finally did it, edge rusher from Oklahoma, R. Mason Thomas. And a lot of talk was about his first name starting with the letter R, just the letter R. Really cool story if you want to go read about, why he's named R, but R. Mason, I think, is his full first name. So R. Mason Thomas from OU. We took him in second round, pick number 40. So we did finally satisfy that need for an edge rusher. It might not have come on in round one, day one of the draft. Not having a third round pick also on that day, and we didn't make any moves on day two. He was the only person we took on day two of the draft. So we got our edge rusher. I was reading some comments on the Chiefs Instagram. Some people were saying like, oh, why didn't you take Zion Young? He was sitting right there. That's neither here nor there at this point for me. Whether it was Zion Young or someone else, we got R. Mason Thomas. I'm excited about it. From everything I've read and seen about him, I think he definitely comes with a lot of energy like Karlaftis brings. So it is presumed that as he goes by his nickname, R. Mace, I think he is going to battle with Ashton Gelati for that second edge spot opposite of Karlaftis on the exterior of the D-line. Ashton Gelati had an okay rookie year. He showed some flashes of a little bit more playmaking ability towards the end of the season. Hopefully with a year under his belt and hopefully with R. Mason Thomas coming into the building, there can be some healthy competition and maybe even some rotating in. But I like the youth and the speed, and hopefully our D-line is, I think I look at it as our D-line now feels a little bit more refreshed. Felix Anudike-Uzomah from K-State, I think he's entering like year 3 with the Chiefs, and he also suffered an injury, if I'm not mistaken, maybe last year. So I don't know how much FAU is going to provide at this point. We've definitely got some guys. There's definitely going to be some positional battles, but I think the D-line definitely feels a lot younger. We're kind of turning over from these days of Mike Pennell, Derek Nottie. We brought those guys back multiple times from free agency and waiver wire releases and all that. And Charles Omenihu, love what he did for the Chiefs, but unfortunately, his aging and phasing out and just struggle with injuries and staying healthy, it has led up to this point of why we have kind of refreshed with youth and bringing in some new faces for that D-line. We're going to move on to day 3. Saturday, we had a round 4 pick, 2 round 5 picks, and then a 7th round pick. So starting with the 4th round, we took another defensive back, and this was the 4th defensive player drafted by the Chiefs. I think this is the first time, because I think there's been multiple drafts where they've drafted 2 defensive players to start off the draft. I mean, they did that with McDuffie and Karlaftis in 2022. I think there was another year previously where they did 3 defensive players drafted first. They added a 4th this year. They went 4 straight defensive picks. I think that's the first time that's ever happened in Chiefs franchise history. Do not quote me on that, but I am almost positive. So the defensive revamp really continued all the way into Saturday. Thursday to Saturday, they took Jaden Kennedy, safety out of Oregon. I think he plays slot cornerback and or safety. At least that's what he did at Oregon. But he is apparently also able to play nickelback due to his smaller size. I think he's like 5'10 or 5'11. Initially, my thought was he might, especially being a day 3 pick, he could be more of a depth piece for right now. But I think also the secondary, I think there's going to be a lot of healthy positional battles and competition as well, particularly for like nickelback and slot corner positions. Looking back to free agency, we did acquire veterans in Cater Kohu at nickelback and Alohi Gilman at free safety because we lost Brian Cook to the Bengals. We still have Chamari Connor. We have Christian Roland Wallace. So I like the pick. I think we just, with all the changes to the secondary this offseason, we just are clearly showing that in addition to free agency, we were going to reload on defense in general, but especially in that secondary room. Defense was a huge emphasis for well over the first half of the draft. Moving into the 5th round, we finally switched gears to offense, which was my hope after our first pick on day 3. So we took Emmett Johnson, running back out of Nebraska, and this was via a trade with the Steelers, a draft pick trade at least. Offensively, I wasn't expecting a another running back, because aside from Kenneth Walker III, we did also acquire Imari DiMercato in free agency, and we also have Brashard Smith. And we do have a fourth stringer. I can't remember his name. It's listed on ESPN under the depth chart, and I don't know if that's like a practice squad name for now. We kind of cleaned house in a way a little bit with our running back room. Like I mentioned, Pacheco moved on. I doubt we're bringing Kareem Hunt back, and if we do, he might be like a third down back. We will see. So we've definitely got some depth and some youth at running back, so we will just see how Emmett Johnson fits in. So after that pick, I was kind of hoping, okay, are we going to go receiver, maybe tight end, maybe an offensive lineman with our last 2 picks? With the second 5th round pick, which was compensatory, we took Cyrus Allen, wide receiver out of Cincinnati. I know that made Travis Kelce very happy as a fellow Cincinnati Bearcat alum himself. And so that also finally filled part of a need at wide receiver. I don't think Cyrus Allen is a very big guy. I think he might be like 5'11 or 6 foot. I will need to double check on that. Right now, he's slotted at about wide receiver 6th, give or take estimate on the depth chart, at least according to ESPN. So could be another depth piece. I think right now it's pretty clear the top 3 wideouts for the Chiefs are Rashee Rice, still viewed as the number 1, Xavier Worthy, and Tyquan Thornton. Even though there's been a lot of criticism that the Chiefs should go after a little bit more size, bigger body, more muscular, more physical wide receivers to really try to win one-on-one, high point balls, and really win in aggressive fashion at the catch point. The Chiefs are kind of doing what they did several years ago when they had the Legion of Zoom. I mean, they are kind of prioritizing speed and I think incorporating a little bit more of the vertical, intermediate, and deep passing game, the oversized. Hopefully adding to the way their wide receiver room looks right now, and with what hopes to be an improved running game, both personnel-wise and also coaching, with bringing in former NFL running back DeMarco Murray from the Cowboys and who recently coached at Oklahoma to the running back room. I think kind of pairing the wide receiver room as it stands today and how it's kind of evolved, and then also the new and improved running game, hopefully, I think pairing those 2 aspects together, I think it's all part of this strategy to ease Mahomes back in from injury, take some pressure off of him. And even though it's been said that Justin Fields is not going to be a gadget player, seeing how Andy Reid kind of utilized Mike Vick back in the day with the Eagles when he came back to the NFL, I'm interested to see if we do kind of utilize Justin Fields a little bit here and there. Last but not least, 7th round pick for the Chiefs, compensatory from the Indianapolis Colts via the Pittsburgh Steelers, Garrett Nussmeier, quarterback out of LSU. And this one kind of surprised me just because the mock draft needs that were noted for the Chiefs was tight end and I think maybe offensive lineman. I was a little surprised we took a quarterback, and my initial thought was, well, maybe there weren't really any notable tight ends or offensive linemen that we were okay with taking in the 7th round. I thought, okay, outside of Mahomes and Justin Fields as the primary backup, we still have Chris Oladokun, mostly been a practice squad quarterback. We brought in Jake Haener from the Saints during free agency. Now we add a 5th quarterback. This could have mostly just been like, okay, we might have a QB3 battle in training camp and see who's going to win that like practice squad scout team job. Maybe who is going to be the developmental quarterback of the future, because I can tell you right now, it's probably not Chris Oladokun. We've had him for a couple of seasons. We've seen all we're really going to see from him. Jake Haener, maybe he was really just kind of brought in to have a training camp invite and kind of fill a 4th quarterback spot for now, and we'll just see how things shake up in mini camps and training camp. But the more I was reading about this pick, none of the quarterbacks that the Chiefs have right now, except for Mahomes, are under contract after this year. And obviously Mahomes is the quarterback, past, present, future, for his entire career. He's going to be the starter for like the next 10 years at least. Justin Fields is apparently only on a 1-year deal. So I think when you draft a quarterback, someone who was a starter in college, has dealt with some injuries, but someone who you're going to have on a rookie deal, he can hopefully be that next understudy and developmental QB under Mahomes to be the long-term backup solution, because the Chiefs have kind of been playing roulette and musical chairs with a new backup quarterback every season for like the last 3 to 4 years. After Chad Henne retired. We had Carson Wentz. We had Gardner Minshew. So that's really what the pick with Nussmeier provides, is trying to get a little bit more stability and not having to go out and find a backup and someone that can come in and learn the Chiefs' offensive system, learn under Mahomes, be in that QB room, and hopefully be someone who knows the offense well enough if Mahomes does go down in the future. Knock on wood. Hopefully he does not. But Nussmeier can be that person to be the backup kind of the future for at least the next few to several years. So that is the draft recap. Overall, I will say I'm pretty satisfied with the draft. I think we had something like 9 picks, and that's one reason you have all that draft capital. We ended up trading, making a couple of moves, and we ended up with 7 picks. So overall, pretty happy with it. I'm happy how we targeted defense, pretty much filled most of our draft needs. And I'm looking forward to news and updates from the upcoming OTAs, rookie camps, and other mini camps ahead of training camp later on in the summer. I'm going to wrap up today's video with a little bit of non-draft related news that came out, one being hours before the draft. And this is a little bit of an unfortunate story that broke. Chiefs defensive backs coach Dave Merritt, he was arrested last Thursday and charged with misdemeanor domestic battery. Basically, it sounds like a domestic case with him and his daughter. I haven't seen a whole lot of other details about that other than that initial article. Sounds like it's, kind of personal, family, off the field business. I just hope everything is okay with him, his daughter, and their whole family. And we'll see if there's any kind of disciplinary action or anything like that. We don't even really know what prompted this, what was the cause of this issue. That was some news that came out. On a little bit more of a brighter, happier note, Clark Hunt did announce that renderings of the Chiefs' new $3 billion domed stadium are expected to unveil later this summer in 2026. And they also have plans of bidding for future Super Bowls, March Madness Final Four, and college football playoff games to be hosted at the new Chiefs Stadium. The only thing that I hope with the word domed is that it is a retractable roof, because I'm really hoping the Chiefs are not going to be completely an indoor team. That is the only thing. I don't think that's the case, but I just hope that it is a retractable roof. But otherwise, I'm excited. And just across the parking lot, the Royals also, I think they released like initial renderings, but they do have plans to move their new stadium around the same time as the Chiefs to be built in Kansas City, Kansas, right near the Kansas Speedway and where Sporting KC and one of the Kansas City minor league baseball stadiums is, I think, for the Negro Leagues. So yeah, that is it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned. I will be back sometime in May to do a little bit of a very brief check-in on probably the rookie mini camps and any OTAs, and also to kind of check in on the progress of Patrick Mahomes and his injury rehab. He was spotted within the last couple of weeks. There was video that came out of him actually throwing and working out in a facility and actually throwing the football for the first time since his injury. So that is also a positive. Again, my name is Alex Liu. This is Win or Lose Chiefs News. Check out my blog as well. I'm going to leave it in the description, a link to that. And I will see you guys next time. Let's go, Chiefs.